Hey everybody, Plushie here, and today we're going to make a hot take video on the newest welfare servant, Elizabeth of the End. I usually don't do this, but because I'm a huge Liz fan and because of how powerful she is as welfare, I decided to make a hot take video. Also because I made a poll a long time ago and she won, so I'm supposed to make hers before I delve into the SSR Lancer. So without further ado, let's get into today's hot take video on Elizabeth of the End. Taking a look at her base stats, her attack stat is unfortunately quite low for a 4-star Avenger. There aren't a lot of reference of comparison, but if we take a look at all the Avengers attack stats, she's quite down low. But it's fine because she is an Avenger, so compared to other non-Avenger servants, it's still decent. She has a base gain of 0.56% on 1 6-hit quick card, 1 4-hit arts cards, 3 3-hit buster cards, and 1 5-hit extra attack. So yes, she has a triple buster deck, which is really exciting for a, crit-based offensive DPS, which is exactly what she is in terms of one of her aspects. And naturally, her gains are quite good on her quick and arts cards and even extra attack, because FGO likes to compensate characters with triple buster cards with higher gains on their non-buster cards, because obviously they have the least amount of cards that generate MP naturally. She is of the Star attribute and Chaotic Evil alignment. This means that she can gain 20% extra bomb boost from the Olga Marie CE, and she has Dolman Synergy, even though I feel like Dolman Synergy throughout the years has become less and less relevant simply because we have gotten better crit supports that don't even care about your alignment. And in terms of her basic traits, the most important one is animal characteristics, because this allows her to combo with Koyan Dark, Noah, and of course receive 20% extra bomb boost from the Koyan Dark CE. This is quite surprising because despite all the Liz's being dragons, this is the only one that is animal characteristics. So this is actually a lot better compared to the other Liz. Everything else she has is quite expected and also not really that important, such as Demonic Beast, Dragon, Elizabeth. None of them are super relevant in my opinion. So overall, I would say really good deck, decent gains but expected, and decent traits and alignments. Her first skill is a self 30 MP battery, as well as a party-wide 10% MP slow charge for 3 turns, and a party-wide 10-star regen buff for 3 turns, meaning that every member gets 10 stars at the end of each turn, so a total of 30 stars for the entire front line, and all of this is on a 6-turn cooldown. So this is of course a nice skill. 30 MP self battery is really good. It allows her to buster loop. The 10% slow charge just for herself is already decent, but of course it's a party-wide supportive effect as well, so it has uses in multi-core, even though it's not that strong. And the star gen is extremely strong. We've seen this kind of effect on other characters such as Himiko and Ganesha, and neither of them generate this many stars. 30 stars at the end of each turn is quite insane for a crit support, and of course her other skills further support that playstyle. So this is a really good skill and a sign of what's to come. Her second skill is a party-wide 20% attack up charisma effect for 3 turns, a party-wide 20% crit up for 3 turns, a party-wide 30% extra crit up for 3 turns if she's on the Halloween battlefield, and finally a 30 star bond. All of this is on a 6-turn cooldown. So this is a very powerful supportive skill that I wouldn't even be surprised to see on an SSR. The charisma effect of course is really good for both multi-core farming and just challenge quest buffing, and the 20% party-wide crit up is a nice bonus. The 30% extra is only triggered on Halloween battlefield, and the only way to force it is with caster Liz's MP, so generally I would ignore this effect, but if you happen to be on a Halloween battlefield, this is literally like Merlin's skill 1 plus skill 2 in terms of the offensive buff numbers, which is kind of insane. And of course this is a 30 star bomb, so she has 30 star per turn as well as immediately 30 stars. So both of these skills combined already makes her a super powerful crit support, and we haven't even seen the best one yet. Her third skill is a targetable 50% buster up for 3 turns, a targetable 50% crit up for 3 turns, a targetable star absorption boost by 5000% for 3 turns, and it reduces her own HP to 1 as a demerit, as well as gives herself a debuff that drains her own HP by 1000% at the end of each turn for 3 turns. And this skill is once again on a 6-turn cooldown. So this is the skill that basically makes her sometimes even better than an SSR crit support, right? Because if you combine this skill with her second skill, the total damage buff numbers is 20% attack up, 70% crit up, and 50% buster up for a target for 3 turns. That's basically the same as Merlin in terms of total numbers, which is insane for a welfare servant to be able to reach. And this skill also gives the target 5000% star absorb buff for 3 turns, which is the highest form of star absorption buff in the game. You basically guarantee the target to absorb every star that you generate for 3 turns. And of course, her first and second skill covers long-term star gen, 30 stars per turn for 3 turns, and immediate star gen, her second skill being a 30 star bomb. So she's a really powerful crit support that covers all fronts. This of course also helps herself as a crit DPS because she has 3 buster cards, as I've mentioned earlier, and she has a damaging buster MP. So having the ability to generate this many stars and having the star absorption to balance out the low star weight of an Avenger is really good for herself to be a DPS. However, speaking of which, this skill has a immense demerit, which is it drains her to 1 HP, and then it puts a HP drain debuff on her. So if you do nothing after using this skill, she will die at the end of the turn, which can be a good thing, once again, if you're using her as a support, because it's very convenient to have an offensive buffer to buff, your main DPS and then switch herself out for another support to come up. This can even help in some farming scenarios where she has some weird utility. We'll talk about that in a bit. But if you want to use her as a main DPS, this is going to be very awkward. The clock is cleansable. You can remove it with any normal debuff cleanse, the HP drain debuff, or you can even try to just out heal it. However, even if you remove it or you try to heal her every turn, she's still going to be extremely frail as a main DPS because she's at 1 HP. So it will pose some problems for her if you're using her as a main DPS or as a buster looper, which again, we'll talk about in just a bit. But overall, her skill set is extremely powerful, basically SSR quality, or even better, honestly, than a lot of the SSR supports out there. Her passives are unfortunately pretty boring. It's just the basic Avenger passives, but at least they're high rank. 12% passive crit up is really nice, and 3.8% MP charge at the end of each turn is mildly helpful for her MP spam in a challenge quest. And finally, her MP is an AoE 6-hit Buster MP that removes enemies' offensive buffs, as well as cast a 1000 damage curse and burn for 3 turns. And the overcharge effect is a 3-turn buster up before the MP does damage that scales from 10% all the way up to 30%. The MP is a lot more modest than her skill set, actually believable as a welfare's MP, but it is still pretty nice. Offensive buff removal makes her an even better utility tool because it removes, of course, normal offensive buffs, but also, importantly, Invul Pierce. So if you're facing a boss that has a removable Invul Pierce, then she can just, get rid of it. And she is already a really decent buffer, so you can just give her a starting charge CE, so she can, use her MP while, buffing a servant, and then she will leave the field after removing the enemy's Invul Pierce. So this gives her even more supportive utility. And of course, using her as a main DPS also means that the enemy don't get to accumulate too many offensive buffs. The burn and curse is honestly not that useful in my opinion. It does enable Honey Lake and stuff, but you can easily do that with command codes already, so I don't think this is like super good. It's not like you will include her in a burn or curse team anyways. And finally, the overcharge is quite nice. It is a small card type buff ramp up, so it is better than a lot of SSRs even, which just has it for a single turn. And of course, she has 3 buster cards, so this doesn't just buff her MP for the following 3 turns, this will also make her cards hit just that much harder. In terms of farming, there are many different roles that Liz of the End can fit. Unfortunately, I don't think any of them are particularly meta, but still, considering she's free and some of these are decently interesting, she is still very, very strong in this aspect. First and foremost, she is a single core Buster Looper. She does have a 30 MP battery and an AoE MP, so she's able to single core Buster Loop. However, one thing to look out for is her skill 3, which drains her HP down to 1 immediately upon use, and then gives her a debuff that drains 1000 additional HP at the end of each turn for 3 turns. So obviously you need to heal her or remove it in order to successfully Buster Loop. The good thing is, the best Buster Looping Mystic Code is the Final Showdown Plug Suit, which has a 3000 HP heal. However, you gotta remember, in a Buster Looping comp, she isn't the only unit that will drain her own HP. The 2 Koyan Lights will also drain her HP. So if you use her skill 3 on turn 1, because she's a 30 MP battery unit, you aren't using Koyan Light's battery on turn 1, because you pair her with a 50 starting charge CE and you only use her own battery on turn 1. And on turn 2, yes, she's gonna go down to 2000 because, you healed her back to 3000 with the Mystic Code skill 2, and then it drains another 1000 at the end of the turn. But if you use Koyan Light's batteries now in order to get her cooldowns back and then get her MP charge up, then she will be at 1 HP, and then she would actually drain herself to death at the end of turn 2. So what you actually have to do here is to hold her skill 3 and not use it until turn 2. And on turn 2, you use her skill 3 and both Koyan Light's batteries at once. The game doesn't allow you to drain your HP further if you're already at 1 HP, so then you can heal her after using all the drain effects, then she will survive until the 3rd turn. And of course, the skill has a 6-turn cooldown. If you have your Append 5 skill at max, you can cast it right away again on turn 3, so she isn't missing out on too much damage. However, her wave 1 damage definitely suffered because of this. Speaking of damage, unfortunately her Buster Looping damage isn't the most flattering looking when compared to the other AoE Buster Avengers. The calculations here are done assuming all of them have their Append 2 and Append 5 skills at max, as well as using an MLB Dragon's Meridian CE, meaning that other than the 50 starting charge, they don't have any bonus effects. And if you look at Liz of the End's MP5 looping damage, it's hovering around other AoE Buster Avengers' MP1 and MP2 looping damage. In fact, when we compare her looping damage at MP5 to others at MP2, she loses to every single one, including Maonobu, Buster Form Space Ishtar, and even the 4-star Gorgon. So if you really are into Buster Looping single core, Liz of the End is unfortunately probably not going to be the best choice as an Avenger pick. And then once again, a reminder, none of the welfare AoE Busters are like really good Buster Loopers anyways. In fact, compared to other Buster Looping welfares, Liz of the End is pretty up there. It's just that Avengers do a lot of damage. Liz of the End can of course also serve as a pure support, particularly in single core Buster Looping. Kind of like Summer Kuro, she's also another support that can swap herself out while also give the team extra charge. However, the amount of units that she can enable to Buster Loop isn't nearly as many as Summer Kuro, simply because of how the extra charge works. Summer Kuro has a skill that gives the target a buff where whenever they hit an enemy target, they gain a stack of manuscript, meaning that if you hit 3 enemies with an AoE MP, you gain 3 stacks of manuscripts, and then she can use another skill to cash them out and give charge to the target. So you can get up to 30% charge with Summer Kuro if you have activated your AoE MP against 3 enemies on the previous turn. This allows basically every 50 MP charging Buster Looper to loop with a Black Grail. However, Liz of the End doesn't give nearly as many charge. She can give you 10% charge at the end of each turn for 2 turns, with her first skill. Other than that, all she gives is pure damage. Now, her damage boosting is a lot better than Samakuro, so if you just want to use her as a damage boost instead of helping units to loop where they previously cannot, she's definitely a better option for buster units. However, in terms of buster looping, she can only enable units that have flat recharge effects such as the Artoria series and Mordred, because they can recharge 10% MP flat at base after they use their MP and can recharge more depending on the overcharge. This is actually why the CE Rising Mud Rain works with them for looping, because the extra stack of overcharge allows them to charge 10 more MP after their first MP usage, which is enough to enable buster looping without a starting charge CE. Liz of the End can essentially substitute the overcharge boost from Rising Mud Rain and allow them to run Black Grail. The one unique case here, I suppose, is Ruler Artoria, who has a flat recharge effect on her MP as well, but it does not scale with overcharge, so it previously didn't even work with Rising Mud Rain, but now it works with Liz of the End. However, I personally don't think any of these are super relevant, because single core looping has not been the most meta for a while, and also this is the exact same problem as Samakuro, where there is a massive cost increase for your party total if you include a whole ass extra 4-star. And finally, Liz of the End is of course also a very interesting multi-core farmer. She can essentially be treated as a bigger, more cost-heavy Arash that has a lot more party support and of course hits harder, because both of them can self-sacrifice and have self 30 MP battery. Now, the benefits of Liz of the End is of course all of her other supportive effects. The 10% charge per turn can potentially be impactful for her other partner in multi-core, and of course her damage buffs are huge. She has a charisma at base, and you can even make herself hit harder if you don't need more damage on your other DPS by just putting the mana burst on herself, and then she would really be a harder hitting Arash. Liz of the End of course also has the choice to not get sacrificed if you don't want to, by just healing her with the new plug suit. Unlike in buster looping, there aren't any other HP drain effects unless there are on your team. There's a potential for that, but most of the times there aren't, because you're not using Koyan Light in multi-core, so a simple heal will prevent her from dying. You can even pair her with specific units. I want to highlight particularly Noah to cleanse the drain effect at the end of the turn, because Noah naturally synergizes very well with her. She's animal characteristic, so Noah's gonna be able to charge her MP a lot as well as give her a lot of damage, so that's a cool combo. If you want to sack her, just remember to use Noah's skill 1 before using her skill 3. Just, a lot of skill sequence problems with this character, but you just have to be a little bit careful. And her main weaknesses in multi-core farming is of course her lack of immediate charge. Self 30 and then 10 slow charge at the end of each turn is not particularly strong in today's standards. And if you want to use her as a sacrificial unit, she has the cost problem just like in single core. But of course, as I mentioned earlier, you don't have to sacrifice her, so it's more of a flexibility instead of a necessity. So I don't want to dock too much points from her in that aspect. And finally, I want to mention a specific comp, which is sort of between multi-core and single core, where in my opinion, Liz of the End shines the best, which is of course the MASH Paladin looping comps, because MASH Paladin obviously requires a turn of transformation, so someone else have to take care of the first wave. And that unit traditionally has been Habetrot, because Habetrot is a self-sacrificing unit with 80 MP battery, which essentially means she doesn't need any additional charge from other units. And her MP also drops critical stars, which is important for Paladin Mash's second skill. As a reminder, Paladin Mash's second skill after her transformation drains all your stars, I guess up to 50, and then convert them into MP gauge. So if you want that second skill to act as a 100 MP battery, you need to have at least 25 stars on the field in order for that to happen. And Habetrot can at least guarantee the following turn after Mash has used her MP to transform, her second skill can act as a 100 MP battery. However, looking at Liz of the End, she is almost a superior option in every way. first and foremost, Liz of the End can give MASH a lot of buffs, because unlike Habertrot, who has no party-wide offensive support ability, Liz of the End can give MASH 20% attack up and 50% buster up for 3 turns, which is, again, Merlin levels in terms of buster looping. Liz of the End can also give the entire party 10% star per turn on each member, so essentially 20 stars at the end of each turn. This means that MASH Paladin's second skill almost is guaranteed a 100 MP battery on both turn 2 and turn 3, unlike with Habertrot, which only guarantees a bunch of stars on turn 2. And finally, Liz of the End can even give MASH 10% charge at the end of each turn, so potentially you don't even need a 100 battery from her second skill, because Liz of the End can give her a little bit of extra charge. And of course, she can sacrifice herself. The only negative when comparing Habertrot to Liz of the End is that Liz of the End needs extra help for her MP to get to 100, because her self MP charge is only 30 as opposed to 80. But that is actually not that difficult a task, because usually you are pairing MASH Paladin and Liz of the End with other MP chargers such as Waver, Merlin, or Oberon, and MASH can also give extra charge to the party members and one target with 30 extra. So Liz of the End usually do not have trouble activating her MP immediately on turn 1. So I'm not going to go into detail on how every Liz of the End MASH Paladin comp works. I'm not going to go and step by step tell you which skills to press. I have a video demonstrating multiple comps, and I'll link that in the description. And also, if you want to know more about the general philosophy of how Paladin MASH team building works, I have a video on her as well, you know, the MASH Paladin Hot Take video, which I'll also link in the description. After a decent bit of testing, me personally, I found 3 comps to be the most efficient MASH Paladin buster looping comp while using Liz of the End. The first 2 comps are if you don't want to occupy 5 servant slots and you want to save cost as well as have 2 empty slots to farm bond with, you can use MASH Paladin, Liz of the End, either Merlin or Waver, and have Oberon in the backline. And of course, you don't use Plug Suit in this comp because there's only 4 members and Liz of the End will sacrifice herself, aka swap herself out. So if you're using Waver, use the new Winter Mystic code that gives the entire party 10% charge, while if you're using Merlin, you need a 20 MP charging Mystic code. You can pick either the Summer one, which has 2 10 MP batteries, or just Mage's Association, which has 1 20 MP battery. And of course, the video is playing on the screen right now, and it's also in the description in terms of skill sequences and all that. And if you want to squeeze in a little bit more damage for both Liz of the End and MASH Paladin, especially Liz of the End, this comp boosts her wave 1 damage a lot, which includes Shakespeare and Plug Suit instead of just having 4 members. And Shakespeare also doesn't, increase your cost by too much. It just takes up 1 extra servant slot. So I think this team is also pretty nice. Once again, I have the video in the description in terms of when to press all your skills to have this work. So I'm not going to go too deep into it. So overall, my conclusion here is that if you do intend on using MASH Paladin to buster loop, which I know not everybody is the biggest fan of because you need to watch 1 extra MP for the transformation, and it's easier to screw up than a normal buster looping comp. However, if you do like that, Liz of the End is, in my opinion, one of the most important partners, probably the most important partner to MASH Paladin in terms of farming. In terms of challenge quest performance, Liz of the End is basically a free buff unit that can swap herself out automatically while not really interfering with your main game plan. So on a technical level, you can include her in essentially any team. Obviously, we have other supports that can swap themselves out in the past, like Miss Crane and Summer Kuro, but they have their own issues when compared to Liz of the End. Miss Crane has most of her supportive effects tied to her MP, meaning that you have to include her MP in an MP chain on turn 1, which fits arts better than other card types, because other card types will have to omit a potentially very powerful full crit Brave chain. And also, Miss Crane's MP charge effect on her MP is very often wasted, because if you're doing a double MP chain on turn 1, while having Miss Crane's MP activate first because you want the damage boost for your main DPS's MP, you're wasting the extra charge effect from Miss Crane. Summer Kuro kind of has the opposite issue, where it's actually very easy to use her because a simple click of her second skill will guarantee her swapping out on the following turn. However, she doesn't really give much immediate impact. All she has is a small amount of offensive buffs. It's a great mix of the three, attack up, crit up, and an MP damage up, but it doesn't give stars, it doesn't give charge unless you keep her on the field, which at that point, she would be more clunky to use than Miss Crane, and unless you really need the guts to survive something that is unblockable, Summer Kuro is unfortunately the cherry on top, but it's a very small cherry, if you will. Compared to both of those servants, Liz of the End is kind of the best of both worlds. She is as convenient as Summer Kuro, because just like Kuro, by simply activating one of her skills, in this case skill 3, she is guaranteed to swap out at the end of the turn. But she has arguably better damage steroids than Kuro, because although they share the same charisma, she has way more crit buffs than Kuro, while Kuro only has a tiny crit buff and a small MP damage buff. Liz of the End also has a 50% buster up for 3 turns, so particularly for buster DPSs, this is really good. And she also gives immediate impact in the form of a 30 star bomb as well as star absorption, meaning that with Liz of the End alone buffing your DPS, she can technically allow them to crit with very high consistency. And finally, even after she left the field, she can give your other 2 members 10 stars at the end of each turn, as well as 10 MP charge at the end of each turn. And even her Bond CE plays into this, as it's basically a 4-star but actually better version of the Merciless one. If Liz of the End dies with the CE equipped, she gives the other 2 members 30% MP charge. This means that compared to Miss Crane, Liz of the End can also give your DPS MP charge, but this time it is actually not wasted because it triggers at the end of the turn, after you have already used your MP and used up all of your MP gauge. Even though her skill 3 self-sacrificial effect makes her supportability extremely unique and easy to use, it on the flip side makes using her as a main DPS extremely difficult. Even though you can remove the HP drain effect to prevent immediate death, she's still at 1 HP after using her skill 3. And obviously you can just not use her skill 3 while using her as a main DPS, but her skill 3 is arguably her strongest skill in terms of boosting offensibility. So a Liz of the End without skill 3 is going to be a very lackluster DPS. If you just need a free option to deal with rulers, yes, I will say even without the skill 3, she is better than the other 2 free options we have, Salieri and Ranmaru X. However, that's really not a high bar. Both of those servants are pretty bad at dealing with bosses, so if you really want to unlock the full potential of Liz of the End as a DPS, you really need to pair her with units that can deal with her skill 3's demerit. Once again, I want to mention Noah, who can cleanse animal characteristic debuffs as well as heal them and charge their MP, so Noah alone can kind of mitigate her skill 3's demerit, and Habatrot, because Habatrot has a debuff immunity effect on her skill 1, which she can place on Liz of the End before she uses her skill 3, so you just ignore the HP drain at the end of each turn debuff completely. And also, of course, her skill 3 gives Liz of the End a massive guts, an invul for a turn, and a massive heal at the end of each turn for multiple turns. So Habatrot, if you really want Liz of the End to survive well after using her skill 3, is her best partner. However, problems will still arise if you try to activate her skill 3 for a second time, which at that point you would need supports that intend to stick on the board, who who also has debuff cleanse abilities or just party-wide invul or heals. Characters such as Castoria is highly recommended if you want to play long with Liz of the End. And of course, you can just give Liz of the End debuff cleanse command codes as well to prevent her from immediately dying after using her skill 3. If we temporarily ignore the massive demerit of her skill 3 to herself, she is honestly a pretty competent Avenger DPS because she has a triple Buster deck as well as a Buster MP and massive amounts of steroids. Again, we have compared that to Merlin and determined it's basically 1-to-1 in terms of how much offensive buffs she has. And of course, she has a lot of star generation with her skill 1 star per turn, her skill 2's massive star bomb, and her skill 3's 5000% star absorption, making her completely negate the low star weight demerit of being an Avenger. So Liz of the End actually has pretty high potential, but just a very, very brittle glass cannon that you have to protect. This is also why she is honestly a pretty good min-turn DPS from my personal experience, because in min-turns, you usually don't give the enemies a lot of chances to hit your DPS at all. The only negative of using Liz of the End as a min-turn DPS is, ironically, because you cannot run 2 more Liz of the Ends in the same team. A similar case with Koyan Light, where she's honestly not a horrible Buster DPS, it's just that you cannot run 2 more Koyan Lights with her as your main DPS, significantly reducing her performance ceiling, which is pretty ironic because I have both of them at 120 and Grand Servant status, so I guess that's just my life, unfortunately. In conclusion, Liz of the End is arguably the most powerful welfare servant we have ever had. Liz of the End as a support has offensive buffs that rivals even the most top tier SSRs such as Merlin after his buff, and she has the unique ability to swap herself out, more convenient than someone like Miss Crane, and providing the party with more value compared to someone like Summer Kuro. Liz of the End can also double as a pretty competent Avenger DPS, boasting a triple Buster deck and a Buster MP, as well as, once again, massive offensive buffs that she can put on herself, making her just a Buster critting machine. Using her as a main DPS does mean you have to deal with the massive self-damaging demerit of her skill 3, however, if you are an experienced enough player and you have enough supports, you can deal with it pretty efficiently, and you can even deal with it with a free servant such as Habertrot very well. And if you just want to use her as a temporary placeholder Avenger, compared to the other free options, she is still completely fine even if you don't use her skill 3 until the final moments. So overall, I think this character, once again, is useful to the newest players all the way up to the most endgame players. In fact, she is one of the most game-changing things that has ever happened to min-turning in FGO, simply because of how powerful she is. So that just shows how good she is, even for people who probably wail for MP5 on every servant. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I had to come back from my down low and burnout phase somewhere, and I think the Liz of the End hot take video doesn't really have any time pressure, considering she's a welfare servant that everybody should have already, and also it's a character that I really like, so it's a great time and way to come back. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed, and hope this is at least a little bit entertaining during your wait for the Grand Caster raids as well as the finale for FGO Part 2.